Hi, it's Coach Joe Lucas, and welcome to the Magellan Network Show. My goal inside of this communication, this show, is to share with you my nearly 30 years of coaching some of the most successful financial advisors in North America. We're going to be talking about strategies, syntaxes. We're going to be bringing guests on from time to time, and I'm going to share with you what's working now. So think of this show as sort of like a little one-on-one kind of mini coaching cast, if you like, where we're going to be going in depth from time to time on strategies to help you grow your business, get more effective, become more efficient, find balance in your time management, grow your business, and quite frankly, whatever else is going on in the world today. So before we get to today's episode, I'd love for you to do a couple things for me. Number one, make sure that if you're watching this on YouTube, that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're doing the audio, make sure that you give us a review on whether Spotify or Apple. We'd really appreciate that. And quite frankly, that does help. It does matter when you rate things and like things and subscribe to things. It helps us get the word out to more of the industry. And lastly, I have a very special gift for you. Go to MagellanNetwork.net, so one word, MagellanNetwork.net, and I have for you a complimentary membership, 100% gratis, where you can tap into about between 50 and 75 hours of masterclasses, forms, tools, templates, and strategies. So please go ahead and make sure you go ahead and get that claimed, smash the like button and subscribe. And please go ahead and leave us a review on whatever podcasting platform you're on. And now, let's get to this week's episode. Hi, it's your Coach Joe Lucas, and welcome to this very special episode of the Magellan Network. And this episode, as you can see, I am not alone. It's good news for everybody. You don't have to listen and just watch just me. Daren Blonski, founder of Sonoma Wealth. Daren is a personal client of mine. He is also a member of our Empire Mastermind. The reason why I invited Daren on the show, because I have to be fair, his partner in crime, Carmine Corino, co-author of the book Broken Dealer, got to interview him a couple of weeks ago. And it only be fair, I want to make sure Daren gets equal time to tell his story and to really just enlighten us with a lot of history and what he's really, really passionate about in the advisor space. So Daren, I'm really, really looking forward to digging in on this, brother, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, glad to be here, Joe. Thanks for having me. Me too. It'd be fun.
Cool. So before we get into the book, which I know we want to talk about the why you guys wrote the book and your personal journey, I've always found this to be interesting. When people start firms or in leadership positions, I think a lot of times advisors get caught up in the concept of, well, I'm going to join this group or this firm. But what you're really doing is you're joining the leader. You're really kind of attracted to that individual or team of individuals, right, that make an organization happen from a culture perspective, from a coaching and training perspective. So let's just start off with the question, tell us about yourself, kind of where you grew up, where you went to school. And I think really what the important thing is, how did you end up here in this crazy business of ours?
In a very roundabout way is the answer to that question.
As most people, fair enough.
When I was in college, I went to this networking event, and the gal I was dating at the time she was an executive secretary for a bank. And so it was with all the executives of this bank, and I walked around at this networking event, and I asked each of them, how'd you get into banking? It's just an interesting way. And not one of those executives set out on a mission to become a banker and ended up being an executive at a bank. And I find that to be really true with most people in our industry. We end up here through a whole set of different experiences and events. So my background by trade, by intention, is industrial psychology. I spent the first part of my career doing leadership development, team development, organizational development. Loved that world. I thought it was really interesting. It was a journey, though, that mandated I be traveling a lot. And I have 3 children, and raising my children and being home, present and available for them is really important to me. So I knew that I was going to need to find a new career. Otherwise, I would be gone Monday through Thursday, desk time Friday, and that wasn't really how I wanted to raise my children. And also having flexibility of time was important. So I changed careers and I had come across the first broker dealer that I worked for. They were really well known for their training advisors. So I was like, oh, this is a good place to start, and
Okay.
we can talk for days on why that's a sucker punch. But anyway, that's where I started, and I left the training and development world, went in to become a financial advisor. I'd been in the market since I was 13, investing on my own. It's a good thing that Robinhood didn't exist back then, because I probably would have been one of those Robinhood traders
Right. Okay.
as a young guy, but trading my crypto or whatever. But
Right.
I gave it to an advisor at a big broker dealer, and for 3 or 4 years, and he didn't make me any money. And so I said, well, I'll take it on my own. And I was working as a park aide for California State Parks. And I sat in this little hut way up in the middle of nowhere in this park. And there was like 2 people a day that would come up in the summer. And I was bored out of my mind. So that's where I started reading investing books. So I
Okay.
always wanted and had inclination to go that direction after reading those books, and didn't know how to get there, didn't know how to make it happen for myself. And then when the training development thing became really clear that that wasn't going to be conducive to what I wanted to create for my children, I made a switch.
So when you made that switch and went to that firm, which is again well known for their training, what were two to three of the biggest surprises you got the first year in the game?
And that was a great question. So when I started, I didn't know anything about what a broker was, what a fiduciary is, what are the different ways of affiliation. Now there's more books about it, but back then there just wasn't a manual to really size through all these things. You kind of had to talk to a bunch of people. And one of my big aha moments was shortly after training. And I referred to myself in a prospect email as a financial planner.
Okay.
And I got an email back from the compliance department that I wasn't allowed to refer to myself as a financial planner,
Hmm.
as that insinuates a fiduciary obligation to the client. And that was like that moment of, whoa,
Hmm.
what's going on here? Like, this isn't what I thought it was. I thought I was going to be a financial planner. That's what I wanted to be. I had no interest. And I could have gone with a bunch of insurance companies and some of the big BDs. And I went with this one in particular because I thought that's where I was headed,
Right.
and realized that wasn't it. Now, a lot of these firms have evolved since then and become much more planning based firms because some of the regulatory frameworks, and
Right.
because of that's just where the market's demanded. But when I started, I mean, it was sell your stocks. And they trained us to go find lots of prospects and then call on the phone and say, if you have some money today, I suggest you buy some. And we're
Right.
like selling Microsoft to somebody, or
Yeah.
it was pretty archaic. But that was one moment, was like, whoa, this isn't where I want to be. What's going on here? That was that moment that kind of took the blinders off me. And I started
Right.
to explore and I started to ask questions.
Mm.
What are the options out there? And
Right.
are there better companies or none? Or where do I want to do? What do I want to do? And, it's really a dangerous thing to pull off your blinders
Mhm.
unless you're ready for it.
Right.
It's the whole blue pill, red pill thing.
Right. So you go through the first year of training there, and then, but you're there for another 4 years, right? 5 years in total. So, like, how did you reconcile or exist even in that culture, knowing that, in the first 12 months, your blinders came off and you realized at some point that, hey, I'm here today, but this may not be my long term future because of the inherent conflict. So how did you make that go for the first? Was it just survival and I just need to make it happen? I need to be successful? Because you found out pretty early on in that tenure about this cultural disconnect that you had, right? So how did you become so successful for those 5 years inside that culture?
Well, I think behind every successful person is a whole lot of people that helped them get there, right?
Hmm.
So there were a
Hmm.
lot of really great people at this organization that helped me be successful, which I'm really grateful for. And that was part of the challenge of it, because I did feel a lot of loyalty to that firm and to the people at that firm, more in particular. And that was another aha moment for me, that loyalty kept me there
Yeah.
until the town I worked in had a lot of brokers in the town running under that same brand. And a couple of the more senior advisors took some of my clients.
Oh, so that was your threshold moment. That was when you said, okay, now you got clarity, right? And awareness, this is not gonna be my longer plate, slow boil it up. Then that starts happening. That kicks you on the threshold, right? At that point.
So that was one moment. It
Okay.
was like, well, maybe my loyalty is misplaced. Another moment was part of the agreement when I went into this thing was that I would still be able to do some of my leadership work with nonprofit companies
Okay.
and organizations. And while I was getting started, the money's not great when you're getting started, right? And I was the only
Yep.
sole income earner out finding people to work with and creating a clientele. And so I needed that to augment
Hmm.
my income. And about 3, 4 months into it, I got an email from compliance that cut that off as an outside business activity. It was no longer approved.
Hmm.
And that was really important in, classic bureaucracy. Somebody somewhere that knows nothing about any of the situation makes a decision and then it impacts
Right.
me. And I get fundamentally why they did it at the time, but it was, really made it much more difficult for me to deliver on some of my other commitments. So there was that moment. It was really an aha, like, okay, well, maybe I need to think about something different now. And then I started doing my CFP, my certified financial planner, and it became black and white. The disconnect between, at that time, the broker dealer world and working in the best interest of the client. And I'm kind of naive and I'm kind of in some ways, I want things to be better than they really are in the world,
You're an
right?
optimist. You're an
I'm an
optimist, like I
optimist.
am.
So I'm
Yeah.
like, why is
Yeah.
this doesn't make sense.
Right.
Like we're either doing what's right by the client or we're not. And so that was a very hard thing for me to manage. What kept me there so long was my loyalty. And I was also the sole income provider for my kids. I
Right.
agreed to them to make a smart decision.
So there's a day in your life when you go to your family and to your spouse and say, I can't do this anymore. Right. There's that day. So then once that decision was made, then talk to us about how you decided your next move, right? Because obviously you could have gone to a firm. You could have got paid to go to a firm, right? From that perspective, in that regard. But you chose a different path. So kind of walk us through that different path. And why did you take what I call the easy money and grab a check and a 7 or 9 year hitch, right? And you went a different direction. So talk to us about a little bit about that.
Yeah. So once I kind of opened the blinders and started really exploring the firms around, like you said, I could have got the big checks, could have gone to any of the brokers, had plenty of
Yep.
offers on the table. I realized that I was just trading one set of problems for the next set of problems.
Hmm.
And that the things that I might be challenged by at that particular firm I was at would just be something else at the other place. And I've always had a very strong entrepreneurial drive. I can't say I would say I'm a great employee, but I'm a very reluctant employee of
Right.
working with them. I mean, I remember Joe when I hired you, one of the
Mhm.
first things you said to me was, Darren, I got lots of guys that would love to have you join them, but you're just not wired that way, man. Or
No,
something.
man. And it's important you know that. I was telling somebody this the other day, a colleague of mine. I said to her, I said, yeah, when somebody tries to hire me to come join their organization, I always say, I'll be your worst employer you'll ever have, but I'll be your best strategic partner you'll ever want. And I
Yeah.
think you got to know yourself really well to know what kind of environment. So the fact that you can say no, which takes a lot of courage, especially where you are in your career with the young family and the economic needs and things like that. It's like you're betting on yourself in a lot of ways, right? And not everybody's wired for that. They'll wax poetic about it, but when it comes time to actually do the deed, they don't. So that's good. So now you join an independent RA, correct? That's our next stop on the journey, correct? So tell us about that.
I had all these different options. I built out a spreadsheet. I can be kind of analytical and looked at all the trade offs. And I met another advisor who had left the same institution. And he was really, I think, fundamental in encouraging me to go straight RIA at the time and acted in some ways as a mentor. We formed a partnership, which didn't end up working well, which I learned a lot from that.
Mhm.
And so I had somewhat of a softer landing, right? It's
Right?
much harder to just do a straight RA startup on your own, zero. And I
Yep.
kind of had a pathway or a light shown me like, yeah, this is how it works. And then obviously had to iterate and learn along the way.
Sure.
That encouraged me because it offered me the best chance at truly serving the client fully in their best interest. There's always conflicts of interest, right? In any business. And, like I say to clients, the conflict of interest you have with me is that I want your business. But once you're my client, I'm going to do everything I can to take care of you and to serve your needs. So there's always conflicts. You just have to mitigate them, right?
Right.
And so that was important, having that person who had gone that path show me that light. And then we built a really great organization together and moved a whole bunch of advisors out of multiple institutions and bolted them on. And before I knew it, within, I don't know, it was about 2.5, 3 years, something like that, we'd built $1 billion RIA, and I had 11 other partners. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So I don't want to get into, because this is a whole other episode, quite frankly, but I think this is really important because in my experiences with partnerships in this game, they mirror very much regular marriages, the 50% divorce rates, basically. If you had to say an advisor today was listening or watching this, and they were in the concept or thinking about doing a partnership with somebody, really quickly, what are the words of wisdom that you, knowing what you went through, what would you tell them about partnerships in this game? What are some of the do's, and maybe as important, what are some of the don'ts when it comes to partnerships inside of this game?
So as you know, Joe, I'm a big believer in DISC, right? We've actually got a DISC assessment for financial advisors up on leadyourfirm.com that we use with advisors that work here. The first thing I would do is figure out what the DISC profile is. Because if you've got, for example, 2 Ds, it's not going to go well. They're just going to butt heads eventually. Like, one will capitulate for a while, and then eventually that won't happen. One of the best business decisions I made was taking on my partner, Chris. Like, I love Chris. He's a dear friend. We work really hard together, but he is by far my secret weapon. And that's because I'm a strong D, and I'm out there pushing. I'm a change agent. I'm creating vision. I'm creating new things. And Chris is a strong C, and he's very detail oriented, and he's very comfortable there. And I'm kind of pushing the partnership, and he's coming with me and putting all the pieces in. It's along EOS, the visionary and the implementer. Getting that relationship right is the most important thing you can do.
Right. So, but for clarity's sake here, this is your next act, not the one that was not going well. So Chris is
I did none of that in the first act.
Right. Okay, good. That's what I want to hit up on that. Because, what I've found is partnerships always look good on paper. And, it's like, there's always a honeymoon phase, maybe 6 months, a year, 18 months, but then like you said, if the gears are not meshed right in EOS language and DISC language and things like that, and you have the wrong styles, in the leadership position, it does create conflict. You're 100% right. So I think that's a key thing. I think a lot of guys get caught up in the math game. Well, what's the splits? What's going to be this? Stuff like that. And ultimately what it boils down to, how are you guys going to operate day in and day out, operate as a unit? What's the culture, right? What's the team going to look like? And those are definitely more challenging to measure. Now we can use like tools like DISC, you can do Colby. There's other PI. There's a lot of different tools to kind of go around. And I'm really excited, which we'll get to towards the end. You're offered to have everybody take your free assessments, and we'll have that link in the show notes for everybody. So that'll be there. So obviously, like you said, it did not go well, and so there's a divorce, a professional.
Well, it actually went really well. It just, money magnifies relationships that are dysfunctional, and just like it can magnify a great relationship, it will magnify a bad relationship. And there were aspects of that relationship that was really clear were not going to work. And there's lots of parts of me that wishes that I had the moral fortitude and strength at the time I realized it in that moment to just rip the cord off. But I'm more of a pragmatist than that, right? Like, I can feel something emotionally, but that doesn't mean I should act on it today. And so then that embarks me on the next journey, which is figuring out how I'm going to be an independent RIA, how I'm going to do it on my own, how are Chris and I going to do it. So when we started Sonoma Wealth Advisors, we were 80 million under management, and in about 3.5 years, we're just north of $1 billion.
Right.
And we made some good decisions along the way and some challenging decisions along the way. But what's made us most successful is that partnership and our culture.
Was Chris with you in the old RA? Hi, Coach Joe Lukacs here, and I'm just breaking here for a moment just to do a couple quick reminders. Number one, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel or our podcast. In addition, please leave a comment or a review. Those things really, really matter. And share this episode with 3 of your colleagues inside the financial services space. And lastly, make sure that you go ahead and claim your free membership inside of Magellan Network. Now back to this week's episode. So he was there with you. So you had a working relationship prior, right? From that perspective. So you knew when you rolled out to start your own with Chris that there's a high probability of compatibility and success because you had in fact worked alongside for a period of time.
Yeah, so he was at a local bank in town. He was one of my competitors for years, and we knew each other. And we had another friend of ours who's like, well, you should call Chris. And I called Chris and we sat down, and long story short, he came on kind of like a junior advisor to me, and I taught him the business. And I always say I taught him the business until we got to what I call the shut up point, where you're mentoring somebody and they look at you and like, I know exactly what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And I really want to say it instead of you. And there's a look in people's eyes, and I call it the shut up point. And then a good mentor at that point shuts their mouth and lets them run. And that's, we got to that point with Chris, and it's been an excellent advisor. So yeah, I had that confidence in him, and I was very comfortable with him becoming a partner of mine when we stepped out.
That's great. So you open up a door for conversations. I want to step into it for a moment. You and I have talked about this, bringing a real coaching culture to an organization, right? Really bring a professional personal development culture to groups. So in your opinion, why do so many firms miss that, right? Like, I can go to a lot of, whether they're RAs, OSJs, stuff like that, and they'll have practice management people, which are important, so I'm not going to diminish on that, right? But to me, practice management is just part of the equation, right? It's the other pieces, right? The morning ritual, the mindset, the other, I'll call them soft skills, if you will. So why do you think, in your opinion, organizations miss that piece?
I think because there's a failure to fundamentally understand how community and societies and people interact. And what they don't understand is that the culture of an organization is far more powerful than any one or many people in that organization. The culture is what keeps the organization going and functioning properly. And it makes all the sense if you just look at it from a sociological standpoint. Part of the work I did in organizational development stuff was looking at what we call socio-technical systems, where we look at how technical systems, how it's designed, like A, B, C, D workflow stuff, and how it's designed to impact the social part of it. And for example, one of the greatest things I don't know why, but just a really insight for me in college, I was interning at the Center for the Study of the Presidency, which is a presidential policy think tank in Washington, D.C. And we do this big event every year where the President of the United States comes and all these dignitaries. And I was sitting next to this attorney at my table, and he's the attorney that negotiated the Iran-Contra affair. For some of the older advisors might remember that. And one of the policies I was working on and we were really trying to figure out was the divide in the two between the Senate and the House and the Republicans and the Democrats. And there was this really kind of disconnect. And we were trying to figure out how do we help guide presidential policy to work across the aisle. And at the time, President George W. Bush was the president. So we were talking, and I said, well, what do you think is causing the aisle divide, or the Democrat versus Republican inability to communicate and get along? And he's like, well, it's the invention of the airplane, Daren. That's not what I thought was coming out of his mouth.
Not been my first choice of answer either. Fair enough.
And I was like, well, tell me more. And he's like, well, you see, it used to be when people were elected to Congress, when people came to DC, guess who they brought with them? Their family. And when they left, when things changed and the airplane became more accessible for everybody, now they just fly back and forth between their districts in Washington, D.C. And it used to be like you and I might not get along politically during the day, but at night we knew dang well our kids are going to be playing together because they're in the same country club and they go to the same school. And guess what? Our partners are talking with each other too. And so we had to figure out how to be more respectful and see each other as humans and not demonize the other and all that stuff. We don't have that anymore. People fly in and they fly out. So they don't have the human connection. And that's an example of how powerful the human connection is. And the culture is fundamentally the human connection that exists in our firm. And if we don't get that right, it's very costly and it's very difficult to get the rest of it right.
So with that said, what are some of the core tenets of culture inside of Sonoma?
Culture is one of those things like, what do you mean culture, right? Like there's different levels in the org school. They talk all about the iceberg, right? And there's those observed behaviors. There's those things that we see, but we're not really conscious of until we're conscious of them. A good example of that is, and try this sometime, Joe. You walk into an elevator and don't face the doors. I want you to face backwards
Mm-hmm.
and just
That's
watch
gonna
everybody
that's
go
gonna
like,
freak people out. That's gonna freak some people out.
totally, dude. They're
You
like, this
know,
guy didn't club me or what?
yeah. It's funny you bring up that story. Quick sidebar here. So, one of my mentors, Jay Abraham, a marketing guy. So I went to one of his masterminds a couple of years ago down in Redondo Beach. And he was telling at dinner, we had a group dinner, and he's telling us, he goes, like I go to Japan, I travel the world, and he goes, it's going to sound like I'm crazy, but hear me out. I ride the elevators facing the people because I look to engage in them in a conversation. He goes, it's fascinating to watch how our society has been conditioned to look at the door or look up or look anywhere or look at the back of somebody's head, right? In that regard. But ultimately, he goes, you do that. He goes, trust me, you'll get some conversation, you'll get some looks, which is, I guess, a good thing. So I hear you. So that's a very interesting story about flipping backwards and doing that. So then culturally for you guys, right? Like you said, the tip of the iceberg, and I believe culture. Look, people make mistakes, and like part of the lower part of the iceberg is what is the intent of the person, right? Which is something you cannot see. So when somebody makes a mistake, was their intent to make that mistake? So in other words, hey, I want to screw the firm, or I want to screw this person over, so I'm going to be late, be inaccurate, get stuff wrong. No, they just made a mistake. But I think a lot of times people in organizations, it's easy to divorce the concept of intent to what the behavior was. Because I mitigate even partnerships sometimes in my work. I did this was last year actually in Los Angeles with a 3-person partnership where they were just not resonating whatsoever. And we had to talk about what's the intent. And sure enough, everybody had the proper intent. Styles were off.
Yeah.
And when you have the communication styles are off, whether it's a D needs to talk to a C a certain way, right?
Mhm.
I wants to make peace across the board, right? They're the peacemakers, right? In essence. But until an organization understands that and see kind of how the players are, it is definitely uncharted black box for most organizations.
We have another model we use that I think really
Yeah,
exemplifies that
sure.
perfectly.
Let's have it. Sure.
And so we call it the grip model. And
Hmm.
we talk a lot about this and preach it in our organization. And my job as the leader of the organization is to do the first most important item is to drive clarity. Organizations are not clear half the time. And so that intent piece that you're talking about, it's actually fundamentally going back to the socio-technical systems coming from disconnects in goals, in our roles, in our processes.
Hmm.
And see, I contend that all of us wake up in the morning and go, I want to do a great job today. I want to work hard. I want to feel fulfilled in my job. Nobody wakes up and goes, I can't wait to piss Joe off. I can't
Right.
wait to make him mad and to have him think I'm an idiot and da 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 da. Nobody. All of us wake up and say, I'm going to do a great job today and put my best foot forward.
Right.
So, what happens between intent and reality? And often it's because we're not clear about the goals, we're not clear about the roles in the organization, and we're not clear about the processes or how we're going to do the job. So that gets all fuzzy and confused, and then everyone starts doing character assassinations on each other. And so one of the things I try to do, I'm not perfect at it like anybody, but when I'm feeling like, gosh, that Joe, I just sort of wish that Joe would get his job, I want to step back. I want to check myself. And I want to say, am I clear? Have I been clear? Am I clear about the goal? Am I clear about the role? Am I clear about the process? And if I can say yes, yes, and yes, then maybe we can talk about Joe's character. But until I can say yes, yes, and yes, getting to our buddy Carmine's, absolute accountability mentality, you as the leader got to take that, not them.
Right. That's right. And when you don't have, and I find in organizations when the leader has not set that vision, right, and the standards, I use the word standard, same concept. You have a team that you talk about, they kind of unclear. I use the word they just run a series of unconscious patterns every day,
Mhm.
which is their goal is to get through the day, right? I got to get my work done, and that's what they focus on. And it's unconscious. There's no, well, how does this affect the organization? What's the meaning of this? Because there's none of those conversations going on. And I think the other bias a lot of leaders have, and I see this all the time, unfortunately, I'm paying that person a lot of money. They should know how to do it, or they
Mhm.
should know what I want, right? So
Mhm.
now we get into the assumptive bias of leadership where, well, hey, you have experience. I'm comping you well based on that experience and your capabilities. Therefore, you should know how I want it, right?
Yep.
Like, and that's like going to a restaurant and saying, "Well, you cook steaks and you know I want it." Like, it doesn't work that way. But again, I think it boils down to also, and I talked to Carmen about this, and I think you and I have had conversations about this. You know, when an advisor starts out, trust me, we're going to get to the book and everything with plenty of time right now. When we start out in this game, you start out as an advisor. There's a singular identity you carry for the first 5 years: survival, advisor. Then, right, you morph, right? Now we pick up some of the business owner stuff. Now I got to build a team. I may have a junior advisor. I may have an assistant, right? Whether I operate inside of an organization or I create my own organization, now I got to take up that business owner piece, right? Then as you scale, like you have done, and Carm has done, a lot of the members of our Empire Mastermind, you now get that other piece, which is the entrepreneurial identity, right? That's the visionary, right? That's the leadership piece out there. The problem is that when you start looking at it from an allocation, like 3 buckets, the bigger your organization grows, the less of an advisor you can be. You can delegate a lot of the business owner stuff, right? Bring in a COO, bring in Chris, right? You're bringing in your implementer, stuff like that, the business owner piece, right? A lot of the detail stuff. But you have to embrace the entrepreneurial identity and the pieces that are inside of that. And I think a lot of guys who start firms do this really well, either do this well or hire it out. They don't really understand how to do the leadership piece that well at all. That's been my experience. Like
Have
they're
you
just
seen
not.
Dan Sullivan's entrepreneurial handbook and his assessment he's got on like here's what an entrepreneur looks
Yes.
like, and it's like so we use that a lot in this company, and one of the things that entrepreneurs have to learn is that their default persona is probably intolerable for most of the organization, which is really weird for an entrepreneur to say and like tell their ego, like, if I am who I am by default, I'm
Yep.
going to probably piss off most of this organization.
Isn't that the founder curse? In a lot of,
It
look,
is.
from Steve Jobs to we can go through a liturgy of great founders, but then could not scale. Travis Kalanick of Uber, right? Great founder, never run an organization based on what I've read and stuff like that, right? He's a startup guy. And
Right.
there are guys that are just startup guys. They want to build, they want to give birth and build things. They can't run them. Then they don't want to lead them, right?
That's right.
So, but I think it's important to that. So let's fast forward. So Sonoma obviously is bolting on advisors, over $1 billion, stuff like that. How'd you guys write this book? And I said this with Carmen, I'll say it here. Look, I know you two guys pretty well. You guys can be more opposite, from a personality standpoint. It's really interesting. For those of you, if you ever get these two guys in the same room at the same time, is literally one of the most dynamic things you'll watch because it's totally about opposites attracting, right? From an approach standpoint. How'd you end up writing the book?
So, as Carm said in his interview, Carm and I spent half the time clowning on each other, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
he's clowning on me from being a hippie from Northern California, and I'm clowning on him being, the quintessential guy from New Jersey. No offense
Right.
to your side. We have some, like, I mean, you take us culturally, we're very different humans, speaking of culture, but our ethos is very similar.
Yeah.
And our life experience and going through the things we had to learn about who we are at our core when we transitioned our business, and the attacks of our integrity, the attacks of everything about us, and what that forces you to develop
Hmm.
and hone, I think creates a certain ethos about who you are as a person. And as Carm always says, like, we were sitting next to each other in Scottsdale, chat, 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 chat. Like, oh, you went through that too, and you went through that. And I remember when he's going through his thing, and I'm like, Carm, don't do this, do that, just because I did that, and whoa, you don't want to do that. And we just start, and so we developed this relationship where just this morning, for example, driving in at 5:30 a.m., I call Carm, he's on East Coast, I'm West Coast, and we're just rapping for an hour and a half about, hey man, I'm trying this. What I did this. What do you think of this? What? Oh, you got that? Can you send me that? And yeah, I'll send you this. And like we're just that way. We're just think partners with each other. And then I think you or a couple other people said, gosh, you guys should write a book about your experience. It's interesting. And it's kind of a difficult topic to write a book about because there's so little you really can say, um,
Right.
because of all the regulatory frameworks surrounding us. So that was a dance. If you read the book, you might find like some paragraphs where it's just like, I think they were going to say something and then it's gone. Um,
Okay.
you know, so we did our best, and we recognize it's just a high level thing. To get in the weeds, you're really going to need some team members to
Mm,
support you to really
okay.
figure out what independence is all about.
So,
And but to start,
let's say there's an advisor right now watching, listening to this, and they're at a firm, right? It doesn't matter if it's a Wall Street firm, an insurance firm. They're in a, we'll call it a capture culture, for lack of a better scenario, right? They are you the first year when you realize, hey, this is not going to work, right? But like you said, loyalty, right? Economics, right? All those elements there. What advice would you give that person? Let's just say it's an advisor, they're successful. They went through their 5 years. They've kind of, they kind of hit where they're sustainable now economically, but they know this is not their, ask them, hey, you're going to be here 5, 10 years from now. The answer is no, right? What do you think their first step should be, other than get the book, which, by the way, you should go get the book.
should get the book.
So after they read the book, what's the second step they should do, in essence?
Well, I think you need to understand your variables, right?
Yeah,
So I would go talk to people who've done it,
sure.
interview them. I'm willing to bet anybody who's gone independent will go to lunch with you because there's this unspoken club amongst anybody who's left a big wirehouse or big firm. And there's just this, I'll do anything I can to help people who want to take that entrepreneurial bet on themselves. I've found people to be incredibly gracious with their time. So I'd do that and start just taking notes and assessing and begin with, like Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind, right? Like, what do you want
Yep.
to be? Like,
Yes.
why, what you're doing? What are my variables? Pulling all that together in a soup, the right thing will begin to show up. One of our firm values is we call it pursuing green lights. And so Matthew McConaughey has this great book. If you haven't read it, Green Lights, it's
Mhm.
probably even better than my book, just a lot better. But anyway, Green Lights is just a great book, and it's his kind of life story. And he talks a lot about pursuing, like he finds these green lights and things just happen. Like if you just trust the universe to bring the things that are right for you, and this is my Northern California coming out.
Yeah.
If you trust the universe to bring you the things that are right for you and have that belief,
Yeah.
it's amazing how things happen for you. And I think if you just start asking the questions, in the other book I wrote called Clarity, I talk about 4 leadership principles. And the way I shaped all that was on teaching people to ask the right questions so that they can get the answers that make sense for them in their life.
That's great.
And
And for everybody, we'll put a link to Clarity, his other book, in the show notes, so you guys can go grab both of them and stuff like that. And I agree with you. Read the book, start doing your due diligence, right? I'm a big advocate, even after you're at a firm, and I still have clients at firms, right? I always want them to have a plan B. And I think a plan B so if you're one of those advisors at a firm, and that's cool. But here's the one thing that I know I'm going to recommend. I think Daren will agree. Firms culture, he told us a story about he was doing leadership training, then the next day he wasn't doing leadership training. I think it's really important for every advisor and for your families to have a vetted plan B game plan, so that if the winds blow a way that you don't like, you don't feel like, well, I can't do anything about it, or I just have to suck it up, or whatever. Where I would rather you have, okay, if things get untenable, here's my first phone call. I've already checked out organizations. I already know, like you said, I've taken guys out to lunch. I've read books. I've done my research. I have my plan. I know my plan B. I may never execute it, or I may execute it next year. I don't know, but I have it, right? So I'd be curious, keep operating in both types of organizations. Why do you think, if you talk to a wirehouse captured advisor, when I talk to guys, like, why are we still fooling with this? Well, excuses, right? Or the rationales, probably a better saying. What do you think are the common rationales advisors have to stay when they're sometimes not even happy? They're just tolerating situation because they're making money, right? And they're taking care of their families. Why do you think they stay where they stay?
I'm going to share 2 things with you on this, Joe. So the first thing I'm going to say is if you're operating at a big firm and you think for a minute that you're anything other than a line on the P&L and just a number to that firm, because they will cut you out and you will lose your practice. So if you're operating at a larger firm and you don't have a plan B, that is akin to the emperor with no clothes on.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely critical. If there's nothing else you hear me or heard in this podcast, if you don't hear it, it's that you hear this. And that is that I've helped at this point or been a part of nearly $2 billion coming out of big firms and helping advisors lift. And I can tell you the stories I've heard and conversations I have had, you need a plan B and you should have one. The rules are not set in your favor. The second thing I will say is it's fear. And our machismo, our egos don't want to admit that fear is often our biggest motivator. And it's one thing I asked my clients. I was talking to an entrepreneurial client and they're trying to decide to make a big decision. And I asked them, I said, if you had no fear, what would you do? And both these people knew immediately what they would do. And we all have fear in life, man. That's just the way life is. Like, fear is normal. It's part of life. And it's learning to use that fear to your benefit. And the big firms, they use fear to manipulate you to stay in place, period and simple, and to stop. And that's just the reality. Oh, your clients are going to sue you. Oh, FINRA's going to do this. Oh, whatever. But I'll take a bet on myself any day over I'll take a bet on somebody else.
And do you also think, because I'm curious about this, because I have a belief set around this, going back to our identities, right? The advisor, business owner, entrepreneur. I do believe there are a number of advisors who just don't have that entrepreneurial gene. They're not the risk takers. And look, just for those who are identified this way, not about, you're a great professional and the industry needs you. So it's not about that. But this is just not part of your game. So for the advisor there, what advice would you give them? So they just know that, hey, I don't want to deal with all that. It's not my jam. I love planning. I love helping my clients. I don't want to be the business owner. I just not what I identify with. What advice you can give a person like that, an advisor like that in this day and age? What do you think their options are at this point?
Well, you still need a plan B, even if you're not an entrepreneur, right? Because that book's really not yours unless you have a plan B.
That's fair enough.
But there's firms like Carmine and my firm, right? So Cornerstone Planning and Sonoma Wealth. We have advisors that we plug to our platform. We run the platform for them. They're advisors. Oftentimes we just get rid of a lot of the minutia that was designed to protect the firm from the advisor, not the client from the advisor. So think about that. Most of the minutia you do as advisors to protect the firm from you. So once you have that aha, you're like, whoa, wait a sec. So yeah, there's lots of firms out there that allow advisors to plug in. They'll take care of everything. It'll probably give you a better payout on top of it. And you can run a business and love your clients and do good work.
Right. So you wrote the book, Sonoma's growing. So 2 questions before we run out of time here, because we will actually run out of time today. So what's next for Sonoma Wealth? And what's next for Daren Blonski?
Yeah, so I've got a goal. I'm going to write 10 books in 10 years. So Clarity was one, Broken Dealer was next. The next one I'm writing is on inheriting money. And that's well into progress, or process, I should say. And 2, we hit the $1 billion mark. We knew we had to go as fast as we could to $1 billion. We did it. Now we're recalibrating on how we want to grow moving forward. Particularly really interested in advisors who are looking to retire, who want a good group of people that they can work with and sunset with. That's kind of our forte. I think we're going to continue to evolve and develop as a firm, and in our thought leadership too. That's really important to us. We've got another website called leadyourfirm.com for ththose firm leaders out there. We'll continue to create tools and different ways of helping leaders run successful orgs. That's the vision for now. There was run to $1 billion. Now we're resetting. Are we going 5 billion, 10 billion? When, how, all that, in what way?
Cool. And the last minute or two we have, any final thoughts, comments, anything you want to leave us with?
I guess I just want to be clear. I think sometimes when we talk about independence we can have a little bit of it could come across as independents are just better than everybody else. And I don't think that's true at all. I think all of us have a place that fits for us in our life and where we need to be. And to your point, some people are wired to be an entrepreneur, and that's great. Some people aren't. And I think you need to be clear about who you are and live to that and do your best to live up to it. Nobody's perfect. So I hope that nobody heard that message from me today was, but do good work wherever you're at and things will work out.
Excellent. So first of all, I want to say it's been my privilege getting to know you these last couple of years. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for writing the book with Carm, right? Thank you for being part of my world too. I really appreciate it. And for everybody here, everything that he mentioned in terms of links and websites, they'll all be in the show notes. So look at that. Go get Broken Dealer if you haven't gotten already. Share this podcast episode with your friends in the game. And see you guys all again next week.
Thanks, Joe, for having me. Take care.
Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Magellan Network Show. Hey, if any of this resonated with you, I invite you to come to MagellanNetwork.net, and we have a powerful group coaching community of like-minded advisors. Come in for a trial. You and I will have a one-on-one conversation. Let's see if I can help elevate your game, both personally and professionally.